today for another cooking video. I used to do lots of these videos back when I first started my channel, but I kind of drifted away from them. But I've really been loving bringing back the cooking videos here. I absolutely love cooking and getting creative in my kitchen and sharing that with you guys. So thank you for joining me today as we make some sandwich bread. So when we quit buying loaf bread at the store probably about a year ago, I was making the artisan loaves of bread, and we were eating sandwiches that way when we wanted a sandwich or toast. But that bread is a lot more hands-on. There's a lot more steps. It's a lot more intimidating. And then when I figured out how to make this sandwich bread, I absolutely loved bread making, and it's so simple to make. I whip this up usually every Sunday evening and then bake it Monday morning, so we have bread to last us through the week for sandwiches, toast, to make croutons with this, French toast, anything you would use bread with. This sandwich bread is perfect. So you are going to need an active starter. Before you click off this video and are like, well, I can't make a starter, sourdough intimidates me, I will kill my starter, because I've heard that over and over and over. Trust me guys, if I have not killed my starter, you will not kill your starter. My starter has been left for weeks at a time in the fridge, has a layer of hooch. Hooch is a layer of juice, liquid that gets on top. It's sometimes gonna be brown. And I was like, oh, I for sure killed my starter. It's dead. No, I revived it, brought it back to life. It's actually very, very, very difficult, if almost impossible to kill. I've left like a tiny drop of starter in the bottom of my jar and like needed it for a recipe and left a tiny drop, and I was like, oh no, I've killed my starter. There's not enough active yeast and bacteria to keep it going. But I would feed it, give it a couple good feedings, and it would revive itself back to life. So I promise you guys, please don't let sourdough starter intimidate you, because it is truly so valuable in a from scratch kitchen. Once you have one and realize how simple it is to actually have, like, it's really not as, there's really not as much work involved as it seems like. You will never go back. So you can definitely make your own starter in your own kitchen with your own flour, your own water, and your own jar. But if you want to skip the steps of waiting the week and trying to mature your starter, and you want an active, mature starter from someone else, you can always ask around friends, family members, if anybody has a starter, would they give you some of theirs? And I am going to actually offer through this video to send you some of my dehydrated sourdough starter. So you can dehydrate sourdough starter, and it like retains the good bacteria and the yeast when it's dehydrated, and then you just revive it. And I will give you instructions on how to do that, so don't worry. If you would like some of my sourdough starter, comment below, send me some starter. The first 3 people who comment that I will be in touch with you, and I will send you a little sample, a little bit of my sourdough starter dehydrated, and give you instructions on how to revive it, and you will have some of my starter in your kitchen to revive and to bake with it. So jumping right in, I have an active starter. You see this blue rubber band, I can't talk. That is when I fed my starter this morning. I fed it about 7 o'clock this morning. It's now around 2 o'clock. So it's been growing since that time period, and you see it's almost doubled in size. Now, this is actually not the best my starter has looked. I've had it where my starter is bubbling over the top, but it's a really rainy day here. It's really cloudy. It's really cold and damp. That gives sourdough a harder time to grow. So in the summer months, when it's really hot here in Mississippi and the sun is shining, my starter will pretty much pop out of this jar. I sometimes have to put it in a bigger jar. So this is actually not the best my starter has looked, but it will rise our bread just fine. You'll see all these bubbles on the side and from the top. That means it is alive and active and ready to bake and grow and rise your bread, and it will be absolutely perfect. I think Eliza is awake. I'm gonna go grab her before we start mixing everything together. And we're back. I've whipped up many loaves of bread while holding a baby, so this will not be any different. I'm just gonna show y'all how easy this actually is. So I'm going to need 3 cups of water. So I have 2 cups here, another 1 cup from my mason jar. Mason jars have measurements on the side. If you did not know that, it took me a while to realize that actually myself. Now I'm gonna go grab my butter that I just melted. I meant to already have all this ready, but I got busy and forgot to melt it prior. So this was melting in our microwave oven, and before we add our starter, we want to make sure that it's cooled quite a bit, because if you put heat with your starter, it can kill it. So that's why dehydrating your starter, which is what 3 of y'all are going to receive if you want it, dehydrating it will retain those properties. However, if you accidentally ever leave your starter on top of your oven and it gets too hot, over 105 degrees, you can actually kill it. But let's not talk about killing our starter, because I told y'all it's super hard to kill your starter. That is hot. 5 tablespoons of butter, or a 1/3 cup. Now there is an ingredient in this recipe that I used to add, but we've been out of that ingredient for a couple weeks now, and I've been making this bread without it, and it turns out just as good. So honestly, I'm probably just going to omit it. But if you would like to add some honey, a 1/3 cup of honey is what you would add right now. It just gives a little bit of a sweetness to your bread. But like I said, I've made it with honey for like the last year. This last couple weeks, I have not had any honey, so I've been omitting it, and it's been just fine without the honey. So mix all of that. You do want to make sure your butter's not too hot before you add your starter. Here comes the starter. I'm going to add 1 cup of active sourdough starter. Nice and thick. You can see it kind of rolls off. Now I told y'all, my starter has been more active than this, and that's when you get those really, really, really fluffy loaves of bread. But this starter is just good enough, and it will rise our bread. Now when you pour your starter into your water, one main thing for all bread making, you want your starter to float. So I'll show you what that looks like. You want your starter to float on top of your water. That's kind of a good indicator that your starter is ready to rise your bread if it's floating. I'm just going to give it all a good mix. You want the water in the starter to look kind of milky. Some salt. All bread needs some salt. I forgot to mention that this recipe makes 3 loaves of bread, like a loaf pan size. So we need a full tablespoon. This is only a 1/2 tablespoon. A full tablespoon of salt. I know that sounds like a lot, but remember, you're making 3 loaves of bread, so it's really not that much. And contrary to what we were told, salt is not bad for us. If you're using a high quality salt, our body actually needs salt, sodium. That's why I put them in my adrenal juices every day. The last thing is flour. So I forgot to bring my flour over here. This is where I keep my flour. I keep it out on my counter in this crock. And for flour, I just use all-purpose for most of my breads. You can use bread flour, but for this recipe, all-purpose actually does work better. I have ordered from As Your Standard a good high-quality flour, an organic flour. I bought this from our local grocery store. I've ordered a high-quality flour from Amazon. My flours just rotate through whatever I can get at the time for the best deal. Eventually, I would love to mill my own flour and like in my kitchen fresh, because fresh grained flour is actually so much better than packaged store-bought flour. But little steps, we'll get there eventually. All right, so I'm adding flour 1 cup at a time until I get around 9 cups. Remember, we're making 3 loaves of bread, so you're really only like 3 cups per loaf. Now this sounds like a lot. This is 2 cups. All right, so I have 2 cups in. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a stir. You wanna stir after each addition of each cup, just to kind of get everything incorporated, so when you get to the end, it's not so difficult to get everything to mix together. 3. A little bit about a starter. Sourdough starter will ferment your grains, and you really want to be fermenting your grains because it makes it much more easily digestible on our bodies. When we consume unfermented grains, they can get stuck in our gut, causing gut issues. Many people who are gluten intolerant can actually eat sourdough bread because the grains have been broken down and their bodies can actually digest them much better. So a little fun fact about sourdough starter and how much better and easier it is for our bodies to eat bread in this way. Bread gets such a bad reputation so often, but really bread is just a few simple ingredients. You'll see I've literally used 4 ingredients here: water, butter, sourdough starter, flour, salt. 5 ingredients here, and honey if you wanted to add the honey. All right, I'm talking to y'all and I'm gonna lose track of how many cups I've added. I think I'm on 4. Okay, you're gonna get a really shaggy dough here. Really shaggy type dough. Keep adding your flour. Trust the process. I say 9-ish cups. I've made this bread with 8 cups before. I've made it with 8.5. I've made it with 9. I think I've made it with like 9.25. You're really just gonna have to learn to look at the bread and see its look and how it's coming together to know exactly how many cups to do. I can't give you an exact amount. This is kind of something you're gonna have to play with. Now, if you put a cup or 1/2 cup too little, you're not gonna ruin your bread. You just may not have the fluffiest of textures you could have had. I'm telling y'all, this is the easiest recipe. It's so hands-off. The most work we're doing is right now. All right, Eliza, I'm gonna see if you can lay down so I can mix this a little better. I am using a Danish bread hook. If you were wondering how it's a mess, you can't really tell what it is, but it's kind of like a bread hook. It's kind of the substitute of a whisk. I whisk eggs with this too, but I do love this for mixing bread. You could also use your hands or just a wooden spatula or a fork. In the end here, I will switch to my hands. This is gonna be 7. I'm really telling y'all, I should not have been talking to y'all as I am adding these cups of flour because I will lose track so easily. All right, so I have a really, really shaggy dough, meaning shaggy like it's looking like this, just kind of rough. All right, we're on cup 7. I think I'm gonna go with 8 and then feel it with my hands and see what it feels like. And then we may stop. All right, that's 8 cups of flour. Again, I know y'all that sounds like a lot, but you're making 3 loaves. That will probably last you a full week. It'll last us about 5 days. It's just nice to have fresh bread on hand to eat with your meal or to make into croutons or like into a casserole. Just nice to have fresh bread. All right, I'm gonna go in with my hands now. I'm not kneading it, I'm really just kind of mixing it together. Your hands are your absolute best kitchen tools. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. I could have finished doing this with the Danish hook. It would have worked just fine, but I'm really just kind of folding the dough over on itself to get it to kind of come together into a big ball. This dough does not actually have to have a knead. Many of those pretty loaves you see all over Instagram and social media that have the beautiful scorings on top, those are called artisan loaves of bread. This is just sandwich loaf bread. It doesn't have to have all the kneading. Like I said, I'm really just trying to get all that flour mixed together, all those little pieces of flour that are on the bottom of the bowl. Okay, so like I said, 9-ish cups. Aim for 9. Go a little less, feel your dough. If it feels really shaggy, but it can kind of hold together, y'all see my dough is pretty much held together. I have a little bit more flour to work in. When your dough just looks really shaggy and you kind of hold it like this and it just looks really rough, that's when you know you're done. So aim less. You can always add more, but you can't take away. Many people will name their sourdough starters because they're kind of like a part of your family. You feed it, you cook with it, it makes so many delicious meals for your family. It really is a part of your family. But I've never named mine. We just always call it sourdough starter. So I've been trying to brainstorm some names. I have not come up with any yet. If you would like to suggest a name for our sourdough starter, leave it in the comments below. I would love to actually name her because she is so valuable in our family. You done? Are you done down there, Eliza? All right, just a second. Okay, here's our dough, nice and shaggy. We're done. I'm just gonna cover this, let it sit on my counter the rest of this evening and through the night, and then I will come back in the morning and show y'all the rest of the process. I usually do a taste test. I know you're not supposed to eat raw dough, but I always taste it and make sure it has that same taste every time to know that the dough is ready to cover and allow to rise. So you can cover it with a plate, a tea towel. I actually just sewed these little bowl covers that are not, I'm not a seamstress. I'll wash my hands and grab her. And we're done. I will need to refeed my starter because I pretty much just drained her when I made that 1 cup, pulled that 1 cup out to make my bread. Feed my starter and I'll move this back down to wherever I feed it and then watch for it to double again before I pop it in the fridge later this evening and let it go dormant. When you put your sourdough starter in the fridge, it just holds it at its state and it doesn't have to be fed. So it will go back in the fridge this evening after I feed it. And then I'll pull it out again another day. It'll probably be 2 or 3 days before I need it again. Actually, I take that back. We're having pancakes tonight, so I need to feed it actually now. So I'm gonna refeed that in just a second. But as far as the bread, back to the bread, I'm gonna leave this out covered at room temperature until this evening. Many times when you make like artisan breads, you have to come back and stretch and fold, stretch and fold. You don't have to do that with this sandwich bread. You just let it be, let it do its thing, let it absorb all the yeast and the bacteria from the air, let the sourdough starter do its thing and ferment your bread and make it absolutely delicious. So it's just gonna sit here. I'll come back to it in the morning and show you what to do next, but that's how simple it is, y'all. Just don't be intimidated by a sourdough starter. It's just a little jar of flour and water. So again, if you want some of my starter, comment below, send me some starter. I'll have all the instructions for you. Don't worry, it's not difficult to reactivate a starter that's been dehydrated. So that will conclude today's part of the sourdough bread. I will pop this in the fridge probably about 9 or 9:30 before I go to bed. Let it sit in the fridge overnight, and then in the morning I will come back and show you what I do with the bread before I bake it. Hey friends, it's the next morning. I'm about to get ready to bake my bread. Instead of walking you through step by step, my house is very noisy right now. If you're a mama, you know what I'm talking about. Morning times are full of laughter and life in my house, so not the time for me to be talking y'all through how to make bread. It's very loud right now. So here y'all get the voiceover of how to finish up your bread. So your bread fermented on the counter for 5, 6, 7 hours the previous day. I forgot to mention, if you want to only ferment your bread for 5 hours or 6 hours and then bake it, you actually can do that. Fermenting it longer will allow that sourdough to add more of its benefits. Especially if you're gluten intolerant, you do want to ferment your bread for a good 12 to 24 hours. If you're not and you just need to get this bread baked, you can mix this up in the morning and let it ferment for 5, 6, 7 hours and then bake it that evening. It's fermented on the counter from about 2:30 until about 9:30, so 7-ish hours. Then I popped it in the fridge overnight so it wouldn't overproof, and it kind of goes dormant in the fridge and just kind of stops the process, slows the process down. And I'm just pulling it out here about 7 o'clock in the morning. And I'm going to grease my pans using some lard here. You could also use butter or coconut oil, whatever you choose, just so your bread doesn't stick. I'm separating my dough into 3 sections. I have my bench scraper. You can do this with a knife, you can do this with your hands. This tool does make it easier. It's something I just invested in about 2 years into my sourdough bread baking journey. I've not always had this tool. It does make chopping your dough, cutting your dough, separating your dough much easier. If you're using a different size pan, you may want to cut it into 2 sections or even 4 sections, just depending on your loaf pan size. And then I'm going to lay my 3 sections of dough into my loaf pan. Now I'm gonna let them have a good proof for about 2 or 3 hours here in the morning before I actually bake the bread. Again, if you don't have time to do that, you can just go ahead and cook them now, but if you do proof them, you're gonna get a better rise on your bread. Just cover your bread so flies or children or dust doesn't get into your loaves. Cover it with a little tea towel. Let it rise for a little bit longer, an hour, 2 hours. You could even go 3 hours if you forget about it. Preheat your oven to 350 and then pop those loaves in and let them bake. That's how simple this is, guys. It's really just a process of mixing your dough, letting it ferment on the counter, separating into 3 sections, putting into a loaf pan, putting it into the oven. That's how simple this bread is. I usually bake my bread for about 40 to 45 minutes. I kind of just watch it and let it get brown on top, touch it a little bit, make sure it kind of springs back up when you touch it, and take it out. It's done. I usually take these out of the loaf pans, let them cool on a cutting board or something, whatever you have, and then slice into them. They are so delicious, smothered in raw butter or any butter. They're delicious with jams. We just go through this bread so quick. I am very thankful that I started making this bread more regularly than my artisan loaves of bread. Being very busy, it's just a lot easier for me to make this bread than my previous bread I was making. I do still make that bread. Probably every other week we have a beautiful artisan loaf of bread, but this is my go-to bread recipe. I make it every week. Please let me know if you try it out and how it turned out. Don't be discouraged if your first couple loaves of bread are not a perfect success. I've had my fair share of bread failures in my 3-ish year journey of making bread. So it is a skill. It is one that in the past would have been passed down to us from our mothers and grandmothers, but there was a generational skip, as I always mention, and we're having to reteach them, relearn them for ourselves now in our current generation. So just go for it. Get you a sourdough starter. If you are one of the first 3 people to comment below, send me some starter. I will be happy and so honored to send you some of my dehydrated sourdough starter for you to have in your own kitchen. If you have any name suggestions for our starter here, please let me know down below as well. I would love to name this beautiful member of our family because she truly just nourishes us so well. And we absolutely love this sandwich bread and many other breads and pancakes and tortillas and all the things you can make with sourdough. So thank y'all so much for baking with me today, and I will see y'all in a future video.